Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum everyone, hello and welcome back to a long-awaited new episode of the Sister Station podcast with your host, me, Mu'mina Koleosho, a Nigerian, Yoruba Muslim, multi-award-winning, multi-hyphenate, writer, journalist, poet, content creator, and youth advocate based in Scotland, who uses storytelling to amplify the voices of Black and Muslim women. And as I grow, I hope to inspire others to achieve their creative goals as well. Alhamdulillah, I'm back like I never left. Today's episode is going to be a little Q&A, a little get to know your host of the podcast, as inspired by my friend Zaren, who did a similar episode for her podcast. I also figured that a lot of people are probably aware of the podcast because they know me in real life or they found me via Insta, etc. But I realized that it might be worth doing a kind of get to know me and get to know the host behind the mic. I am feeling quite energetic today because I did a bunch of cleaning before I pressed record, and so that made me feel very productive. And, nothing like a bit of spring cleaning to lift the mood. So I'm trying to channel the productive vibes into this episode. And so thankfully, one time, I think about a month ago, I was like, hey guys, I'm going to do a Q&A on the podcast. Please send in your questions on Instagram. And then I did the same thing again more recently. And the first time, nobody was asking me anything. And I just find this so funny because sometimes I will go and I'll check my DMs, or even in real life, people will come to me, they'll ask me questions like, oh, Mu'mina, how did you do this? Or, do you have any tips for that? And so they'll be coming with their questions. But when I go and I actually ask for the question, I say, oh yeah, send your questions. So crickets, these people that were in my DMs, all of you, you just disappeared. Where did you go? I'm asking you to ask me this time, right? This time I'm soliciting the questions and you didn't come through. But anyway, at least the second time there was a bit more engagement. So thank you everybody that sent in your questions, and the people that missed the chance to send in your questions, and that you're still what's the word? You're still harboring the question, you're still ruminating and procrastinating and waiting with your questions. You missed the bus. Sorry, you have to come back next time if you want to ask them. But all of that aside, let me actually start answering. So, I got the first two questions I got. I think were related to the podcast. The person didn't say, but just by nature of contextualization, I'm assuming that when they asked me, how did you start? And also, what motivation did you have? I think that's in relation to the podcast. And to be honest, how I started and my motivation, I mostly answered that in the podcasting and poetry episode, which the people really seem to be loving that episode. So thank you everybody who's been tuning in so far. Thank you everybody that has just joined, because if there were no listeners, there would be no podcast. It would just be me and a microphone and nothing. So in short, all of this to say that instead of repeating the whole story from A to Zebra, if you want to find out more about how I started and my motivation, please check out the podcasting and poetry episode. Not so subtle plug at all. So if I find the next question. Okay, so I've lost track of how many takes I have taken to get to this point. I think this is my third take, but I can do this. And also, depending on how I edit this, the questions might end up in a different order. So where I was going to be like, okay, so the first question, and okay, the second question, we don't know which question is going to be 1, 2, or 3. So I'm just going to be like, question? Wait, I'm pretty sure that is in a song somewhere. I can't remember what it was called. I feel like there's a question. Anyway, that's an aside. that's a whole aside. Let me dive into the questions themselves. Ejeka Bere, as my people would say. Let us begin. So, uh, question. What initially drew you to poetry? Now, I am not sure. I like genuinely have to think back because I like genuinely why poetry? I don't know exactly how it started because I think because I've been writing poetry for so long, like way back in primary school, childhood me writing my little attempts at rhyming couplets, so I think because I was exposed to poetry from quite a young age, especially in school, they often will cover like the likes of Dr. Seuss and all of these kinds of mainly rhyming poetry aimed at children and stuff. And so because I was exposed to a lot of that, that would inspire me to try and write my own poems. So I've been writing little poems here and there for a long time, and it just kind of grew naturally as I grew. I would keep writing, but I think one of the reasons I continued writing, so as much as I don't really know exactly what prompted me to start because I was so much younger, I think as I grew older, and one of the reasons why poetry is kind of stuck with me, and I've stuck with it, and I've continued, and I've tried to develop my style and keep writing and creating new poems, is because so the the motivation has changed a bit over time depending on the era of life that I'm in. But I remember, especially in school when I was younger, so when I was a teenager, one of the inspirations for writing poetry was just because poetry is, generally speaking, short. Like, genuinely, that was it. Where if you want to write a short story or if you want to write a book, I know that flash fiction exists and there is some element of short form prose, but generally speaking, prose is long. Where poetry is short. I was like, I would just write something and it's one page, it's a couple of pages, okay, max maybe a few pages, but unless you're trying to write like a huge long epic poem like the Odyssey or Gilgamesh, which I personally don't see myself writing anytime soon. Yeah, unless that happens, generally speaking, poetry is short where prose is long. And I felt like I didn't have the staying power really to flesh out anything beyond the shorter parameters of a poem. So I just generally leaned towards that form of writing because aside from poetry, something that not many people know about me is that I've actually been writing prose for almost nearly as long as my poems, but where I would have all of these kind of epic ideas for like a whole book, mainly inspired by a lot of what I was reading at the time. So I had a lot of fantasy book ideas that I would start writing them and I would never finish. I would not get very far at all. Maybe a few pages in, and the story is just abandoned. And this book now just becomes a short story because it's just ended. Or even because when I would enter writing competitions as well for like young writers and youth competitions, etc., some of them would be short story competitions, and I was like, yes, this is great. I can start a story, I can write something and then not have to worry about anything else that happens beyond this 1,000 words because nobody's asking for it. I can just leave everything on a cliffhanger and call it a short story when it was really just an unfinished thought process. So I used to really struggle for a long time with this idea of not only starting a story, but I have to continue it and I have to finish it for how many pages? So that's why anybody that tells me that like, oh, they wrote their first novel when they were like 13, or they wrote their first novel when they were in high school or just in their teenage years or as a child, I'm super impressed because I'm like, at that age that was an impossibility. I could not fathom writing that many words. It was rough. So yeah, one of the main motivations for getting into poetry, like I said, especially when I was younger, was just because it was short and sweet. Now I would say, apart from the brevity of poetry, I also just like poetry vibes. But me trying to say this eloquently, but poetry is just unique and different, and you can do stuff with it in a way that you can't with prose. And by that I mean, I think one key thing that I enjoy with writing poetry is the liberties that I can take that I can't really get away with in prose. In the sense that, whereas with poetry, and not to say that poetry doesn't have any sort of structure or rules, because it does, and there are specific layouts and things like sonnets or similar particular structures and techniques and stuff. So there are definitely rules and regulations, so to speak. T's and C's apply, but I feel like you can get away with a lot more in poetry. Like, I like writing a lot of sentences that don't make grammatical sense, simply because I, swapped words around to have a particular rhythm or rhyme, or even just like cutting words in a sentence that if you tried to write it like that in prose, or even like say something like that, nobody would understand what you're saying, but it works because it's a poem. So yeah, I like experimenting with poetry. I like the fact that I can bend rules, and I literally have a poem where I talk a little bit about that. If I remember enough to quote myself off the top of my head, I think it literally starts off like, I like to play with words like strings, like guitar strings. It's fun, like a game, like chess. And that basically is how it is sometimes. I just like wordplay and playing around with words. So yeah, that's what I like about poetry and keeps me writing poems. Okay, so on to the next question. The next question is, what is the last book you read that surprised you? This is a most excellent question. And the reason why it is an excellent question is because, trust me, it is very difficult to surprise me these days when it comes to books. When it comes to a lot of things, to be honest. Books, movies, TV shows, a lot of the time, like 10 minutes in, I've sussed the plot. I know who the culprit is. I know who's going to end up with who. I know who did what, when, why, how. After thinking over this question and pondering over it for a little bit, the last book that I read that surprised me was actually a thriller. And the reason why I say it like that is because I've read a lot of thriller books since then that did not surprise me. And not necessarily that I didn't enjoy them, because I still enjoyed some of the ones that I figured out the plot. So I think for me, where before I used to measure how much I enjoyed, especially like with the thriller genre, so both in terms of books and films, I used to measure how much I enjoy it by kind of how shocking the twist was. But now that a lot of the time I see the twist coming, I can't really do that, because I realized that there were some books or films that I felt like the twist was predictable. So I would get to the end and I would come back and think to myself, at first I would feel disappointed, like, I saw that coming, that was too predictable, and I would just kind of write it off. But then sometimes I would think to myself later, I was like, no, but actually, before the quote unquote big reveal, and before I realized that the big reveal didn't feel big because I saw it coming, did I enjoy the plot up until that point? And if the answer is yes, then it was a good movie, or it was a good book. So I realized that now when I look at it through that lens and I think back, actually knowing the plot, or knowing the spoilers, so to speak, doesn't necessarily ruin it for me, because sometimes I can still enjoy the ride. So for me, what would make the book or the film bad would be that not only did I suss the twist or figure out the plot before it's fully unraveled, but then if on top of that, as I was waiting for you to reveal what I already knew, if I wasn't enjoying myself and I felt like this thing is dragging or this thing is boring, then I'm like, yeah, no, it's not good. So anyway, back to the book that surprised me with all of this preamble. The book that surprised me, right? Drum roll, everybody ready for the reveal? The book was called The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Delilah Harris. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. For this book, I actually listened to the audiobook a little while ago, and I was surprised by the plot, I was surprised by the ending, and pleasantly so. Like, the book was well executed. And the book surprised me, and yeah, I enjoyed it, and I would recommend it because who doesn't love black thriller? And I'm trying to think how to sell the book without giving spoilers. That's the reason why I've been talking in a very roundabout way. But I will try and give a little premise to intrigue people a little bit, because at this point all I've given you is the title and the author. So I will try and give a brief overview. But essentially, the main character was the only black person in her place of work. And oh, look, she comes to work one day and there's another black woman working in at the same company as her. And I think what was interesting to me is that, if I remember correctly, I think part of what was explored in the book, and as well as the other ways that the plots went and the other things that were explored, but it was interesting how the main character essentially sees this other black woman join and wants to essentially establish a sort of connection and allyship of we're in this together kind of thing, whereas the other black woman is almost kind of not really reciprocating that and is kind of doing the opposite, but in some different ways, if that makes sense. And I just thought it was an interesting dynamic, because I feel like, at least I could relate to it, in the sense that I feel like a lot of us, if we do turn up in a space and we're the only black person, only Muslim, only person of color, etc., and then if you see another one, you're instantly like, yeah, let's connect, let's let's be pals, let's be on the same page. And it could be really disheartening when that doesn't work. Like, I know that there's a phrase, skinfolk aren't always kinfolk, or something along those lines. It essentially sums up and speaks to the experience of, as much as, especially as a black woman, when I see other black women or black people generally in spaces, I tend to want to establish some sort of connection, and for us to kind of be friendly in some way, or in whatever terms, especially if there's only one of us, a couple of us, etc. But it can feel really painful to be rejected by your own people, like, if it's done in such a way that can be quite cold, like, why are you trying to be all friendly with me and stuff, just because we're the only ones that like look like us here. Or like, some people are trying quite hard to disassociate themselves from maybe their blackness or their quote unquote perceived otherness, to the point where they end up rejecting you because they're really trying to distance themselves from you and from that, because you represent a connection to their blackness or their identity of color of some respect, if that makes sense. So there's that sort of standoffishness and coldness, but then the step beyond that can also be directly sabotage and like direct antagonism. So that can be even worse and rough, because like and that makes me think of another phrase, that when people are like, oh, it be your own people, like it hurts differently. Like, it's one thing if a white person is moving mad and being racist and all these kind of things. It's another thing if your own people, your own person does something to slight you or something. That's a different kind of pain. But anyway, I'm fully digressed. If you haven't read The Other Black Girl, you should read it. That's the bottom line. And on to the next question. So, favorite poem. Can you also explain why it's your favorite? These people are giving me exams today. Favorite poem? I have to pick just one? My goodness gracious me. I don't think I have a favorite poem. I will need to think about this. Let me think about poems that I have heard, poems that I have read. Okay, interestingly, I'm going to answer this question a little bit unconventionally. And I'm actually going to say that one of my favorite poems, like recently, like right now, in the last few weeks, months or so, is actually an unpublished poem that I read. So unfortunately, I don't have any link or plug to share to show where people can read it and stuff. But in terms of why it's my favorite, it was just really poignant. Like, it really moved me in a way that I've not experienced in a while. Yeah, I just thought that it was really, really beautiful. Okay, so this is a slightly easier question, because the next question I got are, who are my favorite poets? So, drum roll, please. Okay, actually, no drum roll this time. I'm just going to go through it. So, my favorite poets, I would say I always want to say stuff like top three, top five, but I'll try not to enumerate it because otherwise I will lose track and lose count. Just to list off a few. So I'd say one of my favorite poets is Rakaya Fetuga. She's a Nigerian Ghanaian spoken word poet based in the UK. And I really like Rakaya's poetry because her delivery is just really cool. Like, she's very soft spoken, and there's just a way that she delivers her performances and the sort of rhythm to her words that is quite unique. And I also just like a lot of the themes that she explores, different aspects of faith, culture, identity, that sort of thing. And then one of my other favorite poets is Sophia Thakur. She does spoken word, but she also has some poetry published as well. So interestingly, her first poetry book, Somebody Give This Heart a Pen, if I remember correctly, I think is the title. I listened to the audiobook of that, so as opposed to reading it, and I would recommend. I think generally, I've always been a big audiobook person, but I used to just like listen to novels as audiobooks. And it was only more recently that I started listening to poetry audiobooks. So I used to just read poetry before. And generally, especially poets who do spoken word as well, I would recommend, if you have a chance to listen to the audiobook version of their book, 10 out of 10 would recommend. David Larby as well. He also does a lot of content online, like sharing his poems through Insta. That was where I first came across him, actually, before he released his debut. Yeah, he just has like really positive vibes, and that's something that I admire about David Larby's poetry. And I will move on to the next question. And the next question is, what do you do outside of writing and what brings you joy? And they said, inspired by your craft, little heart emoji. Thank you. And so, yes, what do I do outside of writing? See, the answer to this is quite boring. Not much, because writing is all I do. I hate to break it to you guys, like, writing is my life. There's really not much going on beyond the writing, because if I'm not writing poetry and working on my novel, I am also writing for work, because maybe I'm working on an article for publication, or maybe I am drafting captions for the content that I still haven't posted. And so I tend to write a lot, or I'm journaling as well. I also journal quite a bit. I'll be honest that, so outside of writing, I was joking when I said I don't do much. Like, I generally do a lot of writing. Writing takes up a lot of my time. But aside from that, I also read a lot. I am constantly reading a book, listening to a book, listening to a podcast. I also do Duolingo. Me and the Duolingo bird at this point are like 5 and 6, because my streak has surpassed 1,500 days. Thank you for the applause, everybody. No, but seriously, so yeah, these are other things I used to spend my time. I also love the gym. So if I'm not writing, you will find me lifting weights, lifting heavy metal in the gym. You'll also find me trying to track my protein intake. I'm a proper like gym girly. What else do I do? That's I think those are kind of my main hobbies and interests. And also just generally, spending time with family, friends, going to events. And I'm trying to think if that has brought me to the end of the questions. I know there were at least one or two more. Let me try and find the other question. Oh, yes. Next question. How to stay upbeat in a publishing world where rejection happens a lot. Positivity tips. Girl, I don't even know what to say to you, because me self, I need somebody to answer this question for me, because it is difficult. How to stay upbeat when I'm just constantly getting beat down. I feel down. I feel low. I feel very out of it. sometimes, a lot of the time, it can be really rough. It can be tough because just generally recently, I say recently, like it's something new. Constantly, actually, not recently, but constantly, my inbox rejection, rejection, rejection. That inbox of mine, it has seen pepper. I have just, yeah, it's been one thing after another, and it can be very demotivating just to feel like I'm not getting anywhere, and just I will do all of this sort of writing and upskilling and networking and applying, and at times it's just like another rejection. I get more rejections. I maybe get to an interview, but then I don't get the role or the opportunity, etc. And it can just feel like a lot. But I think one of the ways that I try to stay upbeat first and foremost is I just try not to dwell on it. Like, as soon as I scan an email or I scan a message and I just see that it's an unfortunately and it's a negative, immediately archive the email or like move it into another folder. I try and like keep it pushing and move as fast as humanly possible, and distract myself with something else and just try and move fast. So moving fast, being speedy, and just trying to be like on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing can help. Yes, there is the side effect that sometimes I end up experiencing burnout, and that is something I'm still trying to manage and get to grips with. But the sort of speed racer mindset can help to just keep things moving and keep things moving and keep going. And I think another way I try to stay upbeat is I try to remind myself other writers that I admire and other people that I admire and generally have been here before. So even if I see some people and I think they're like, oh, they've made it and they've succeeded in X, Y, and Z, I might like, go and watch an interview or like read something or like an article or whatnot that talks about how, oh, this person spent X amount of months or this many years trying to get their novel published, or this person was like unemployed for this amount of time before they managed to get a role at this company, or like, I just try to remind myself that if we think about it, really everyone has been there. Like, it can feel very lonely and isolating, don't get me wrong, especially when maybe you open LinkedIn and you see, I'm excited to announce that I recently started. You know how it is. The people, we know how it is, right? It can be rough. And if you're just scrolling through and it's just constantly, excited to announce, I'm excited to announce. Everybody's announcing something. When will I have something to announce, right? Me too, I want to announce, I want to belong. So it can be rough, but I think, yeah, just trying to remember that it's very common for this to be the case, and also that if we think about it, this is like actually succeeding or actually like getting things is often just the tip of the iceberg. Like, most people spend most of their time getting rejected or missing opportunities. For example, even if we think about acting, and if I use the analogy of like going for auditions, and we might see this like A-list, top-notch, Oscar award-winning actor or actress in this really prominent film, but we don't actually know the behind the scenes of, before they landed that one role, they actually did like 20 other auditions and had a bunch of other sort of interviews and callbacks that they went through that they didn't make the final cut. But this is just one out of 20. And just generally, the more opportunities that we pursue and the more we put ourselves out there, the more you're actually going to get rejected. Like, it doesn't, those numbers actually don't tend to reduce. That if anything, in order to succeed more and in order to get more yeses and more acceptances and successes, you actually, the no's almost increase proportionally, kind of thing. So, and also just to try and frame it as like every no is just one step closer to a yes. I actually just made that up on the spot. I'm going to take a note of that to remind myself, actually. Every no is one step closer to a yes. So trying to think of that as well. And I think also other positivity tips, I think also just trying to remind myself that, alhamdulillah, that I can write, and that I have this thing called writing, and that this is something that I enjoy doing, that I am able to do that I've been blessed with, and just trying to sort of soak up that positivity of enjoying my own skill and not trying to put so much pressure on it in a quantifiable way, if that makes sense, but just really trying to sort of enjoy the process. Yeah, like they say, like, enjoy the ride and stuff, because every step of the journey is something that I can enjoy as well. Really try to live in the moment. I know that sounds so cliche, but to really do what I can with this time, as I'm still kind of waiting for something to come through. In the meantime, whilst I don't have some pressures or like commitments and expectations from like a contract or from sort of specific formalities, if that makes sense, like whilst I'm still in this sort of era of just being a I say a free spirit to an extent, that really just trying to revel in that and just let myself explore this space that I'm in. I feel like that's probably one of the most whimsical turns of phrase that I've ever used, but you get the idea. So yeah, with all of that said, I think that's all of the questions. Or maybe there are a couple more. I might just have to do this again. I think we're just going to have to do this again, because I think I actually did not answer all of the questions. I think I missed some. And we're coming up to time. I probably will still have to chop off some stuff from this episode. But in the spirit of it's a solo episode, let me round off with a little poem before we go, and a short reminder of the fundraiser that I am still doing. So this poem is a short and sweet little number, and it is called She Has a Way with Words. I turn this pen into a needle, weaving words together into order I can sort through. I take my hands to task and bleed ink from my fingertips, serving up a cocktail of emotions, a perfect storm, a commotion raining down, a torrent turned to pixels and bytes, saved and tucked away in cloud storage and sites. Lines that will never see the light of day, lines that live and die out in just one play. But they fulfill a purpose, no less. They serve their time in due course to express what can only be understood with words. I pick up works of others from time to time, flick through pages, consume line by line, a source that can prove life-giving, faith-restoring, as the stories expand and grow more full. These words wield power, provoke motion in one's emotions. They summon an essence from deep within, something beyond our comprehension that lies beneath the skin. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for tuning into this episode. And I have hopefully remembered to add all of the links to the books and the poets and all of the people and recommendations that I mentioned in this episode in the episode description. I've also added a link to a fundraiser. So during Ramadan, I started fundraising for Muslim Youth Helpline, and so far past the halfway mark. So the goal was to fundraise up to £1,000, and I've raised over £500 so far. So yeah, I'm trying to raise the other half. And so if you have a moment, even if it's just £1, no amount is too small. Please donate and support the cause so that Muslim Youth Helpline can continue providing mental health services to support young Muslims in the UK. And that brings me to the end of the episode. And thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the podcast and for returning for new episodes and for being on my case for when I will release more episodes. And stay tuned for more guest episodes upcoming this season as well. And inshaAllah, I will also be posting more solo reflections as well in the future. So thank you, everybody. And until next time, over and out. And that is a wrap for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to follow, like, share, download, subscribe, and rate the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred streaming platform. And you can also find us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Sister Station Podcast. And you can also find me, your host, Mutmana, on LinkedIn and Instagram at Mina's Musings. And finally, thanks again for tuning into this episode. I hope that you come back for more. But until then, Assalamu alaikum and bye.